Hello there again. Hello, dear guys. I would like to summarize the NATO summit in Ankara. There was a lot of, you know, guys who can be called military mercantilists, and the topic of this stream is against this military mercantilism as the obstacle to the world peace. So let's start.
See how the Red Army turned green like the US dollar. Love for the military is part of national sovereignty. But this love of the people has been sold for mercenary purposes by military mercantilists since the time of Machiavelli, or even earlier. In the 21st century, they undermine the national sovereignty and cybersecurity of the United States as well. But Russian military mercantilists are in focus of these 12 topics for students and scientists in my project online. After the collapse of the USSR, the ideological Red Army turned into the military mercantilists and looked like cynically pragmatic, like the green US dollar military machine without much of previous ideology. During the transition of the conscription armed forces to a contractual basis, the military as an institute in other ex-republics of the USSR also turned green. Military mercantilists have served as striking examples since the 1990s, with their rapid self-enrichment in Chechnya, Georgia and Ukraine. At that time, all ex-Soviet military personnel were dollar tested for $3 plus in the United States and NATO countries for accelerated defense conversion. Its task also included the re-employment of ex-Soviet military personnel in their small and medium-sized businesses. But with that amount of money in dollars, President Yeltsin bribed the ex-military for his legitimacy, in particular, during the shooting by tanks of the Supreme Soviet Assembly in October 1993. And when the military-industrial complex was disbanded, Yeltsin did not punish looters of state and military property. By encouraging those plunderings, Yeltsin was driving an aspen stake into alleged communism. But in reality, he was raising his grave digger. Since the 1990s, the new warlords in the CIS have appropriated the defense potential of the former USSR. They sold and resold to each other, as well as abroad, rules of self-enrichment of military mercantilists into the chaotic privatization. This is the topic for Project NO.1. There are already a number of papers on this topic in the USA, Norway and Sweden to disarm the communists and remove the red directors from the military-industrial complex. Something similar was repeated in Iraq in the 2000s during the U.S. Democratic Party's advisors around the weak-willed President Bush Jr. and under the overly determined military mercantilist President Obama. There, it was from the disbanded armed forces of Saddam Hussein that two wings emerged, the Sunni and the Shiite, of the Islamic Terrorist International. So, instead of disarming the communists of the USSR, Yeltsin created regional armed forces under the rule of organized crime groups. They emerged with the criminal private sector without the previous control of the party and government of the USSR. See the book, Thieves, The Super Mafia of Russia by Mark Galeotti and numerous monographs. Post-Soviet military mercantilism became legal under the 1993 Constitution, and later under the 2020 Constitution, in order to take everything from the state treasury as the locomotive of the sovereign economy. Military mercantilists from the regions of the Russian Federation seized state and military property and formed the staff of the Ministries of Defense of the Russian Federation, the CIS and the CSTO from their local cadres. This is topic number 2 for the project. Until now, the Moscow face of military mercantilism is regional, from St. Petersburg, Tambov, Dagestan, etc. mafiosi in military uniform. Russian Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov from Dagestan was arrested in the summer of 2025 with billions of dollars in bribes for kickbacks during military construction. Since Soviet times, the Highlanders of the North Caucasus have dominated the construction battalions. They serve their local mafias faithfully, not the CPSU or the United Russia Party, but the entire main body of the armed forces has been accustomed to serve the ruling party since the days of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, even at the expense of losing military professionalism during constant party purges. Since the 2000s, the priority of the military mafia mentality in both Moscow regions and other the military districts has been putting the dollar higher and higher than thoughts about the motherland in the alleged global dispute with the United States and NATO. At the same time, the low professionalism of the military is becoming more and more obvious. At first, it fell due to the economic problems of the Russian Federation in the 1990s, and later due to the parasitism of the armed forces and the entire security sector during the oil boom of the 2000s and 2010s. That is why, in various countries, military mercantilism, theme number 3, has become the core of its activities in Ukraine. Against the background of patriotic statements about protecting the national interests and security of country, in the minds of military mercantilists in power in the Russian Federation, the US dollar is already being replaced by the yuan with the ruble and the Indian rupee, with the growing role of the Russian Federation in the SCOBRICS. There has been a dispute between the armed forces and intelligence community for a long time. Which of them is more selfless? So far, intelligence with a higher level of professionalism has been winning after the liquidation of the military coup of 1993 and during the capture of the Kremlin by the ex-security officer Putin in 2000. The priority of intelligence over the armed forces is reflected in its high rating among the media and the public, including abroad. Topic number 4. The Russian armed forces plans for their own, without politicians in Moscow. Perestroika are purely propagandistic, but military mercantilists also spend money on them, not from their wallets according to information from friends and intelligence, or from their whistleblowers or secret informants in the armed forces. For example, the armed forces under Biluzavazan Unified Community points to the dependence of the armed forces of Ukraine on NATO and the oligarchs of Ukraine, rather than on popular support. What the Russian Federation and Ukraine have in common in the culture of military mercantilism, mindset, which brings the military of both countries closer together in a long-standing conflict, is agreements between each other behind the scenes. Figures about allegedly high losses are being published in public as dust in the eyes of the leadership and the population in order to more easily get into the federal treasure. Topic number 5. In topic number 6, one might trace the dynamics of how media soap bubbles are bursting about the course of special military operation of 2020 to 2026. NATO and US intelligence under Obama and Biden have information about the Kremlin's real plans in Ukraine from sources at the top, but there is no field data on the professionalism of the armed forces themselves. The imposters, the oppositionists of Ukraine, and the Russian Federation, with their genetic aggression towards the military as an institution, took over the work of secret intelligence. But Trump 47 does not trust those in Russia and Ukraine, as well as the relocators with their ties to the U.S. Democratic Party with money from USAID and the Soros family. Even today, without Soros's money and from the Dems, or dumps, as Trump called them, those alarmist relocators are still prophesying about the Kremlin's seizure of the Baltic states, or drone attacks on Poland through Belarus. None of the relocators asks about the lithium of Donbass as the main reason for the SMO as a goal to undermine Ukrainian independence, and not care about the protection of the Russian language there. More recently, a lithium axis has developed between Donbass and Serbia, with its claims to lithium in Kosovo and Bosnia. In this regard, it is planned to occupy Odessa and the entire Black Sea region against the EU. Missiles and artillery shells from Serbia, from Vucic and drones from Iran can prolong the confrontation between the armed forces of Ukraine and the military-industrial complex. Both the EU and the USA, as well as the Russian Federation and Iran, Under the current government, the new British Prime Minister has withdrawn from the games of military mercantilism. The civilian population of Ukraine and the Russian Federation are against the raids of their own forces and the brutal mobilization of the armed forces by Zelensky. That is why Ambassador General Zelensky is ready to replace him as president in the fall or sooner. He is promised pounds sterling by King Charles while he is still alive and euros from the EU. At the same time, in Russia, Defense Minister Belousov confiscates dollars from 30 of Putin's wallets to take his place, but with rubles and yuan as an alternative to Western currency. It is the military's dollar attacks on corrupt ties between politicians and military mercantilism that can gain the support of the masses. The success stories of the armed forces of Ukraine and the Russian military in the format of psychological warfare are no longer convincing today, especially where unemployment drives for military contracts without the desire to risk their lives in battle. Instead, looting and self-enrichment of the Russian and Ukrainian militaries is growing, with the active sale of their weapons and shells through smuggling channels in Syria, the UAE, etc. The lithium of Donbass, worth $12 trillion, has long been not a black hole for the Russian Federation, but a lever of pressure on China, which controls 75% of the production of lithium products while it plugs the lithium of Donbass. It is important to identify the links between the military mercantilism of the Federation, Belarus and Ukraine with the Chinese customer. Topic number 7. The Slavic Christian axis of lithium Donbass Serbia will displace China in the digital race with the United States and the EU and trade with the Islamic world. Since Soviet times, Syria has been a platform for semi-legal military technical cooperation between the military of the now Russian Federation and the armed forces of Ukraine, even before 2014. And soon after the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, Syria, in cooperation with Turkey, after the expulsion of the military mercantilists of the Russian Federation and the armed forces of Ukraine from Crimea, will be able to join Crimea as a free economic zone. There, the joint capitals of the Arabians and Iranians, $300 billion unfrozen in the United States, might neutralize the yellow rune as the basis of the Russian armed forces. Such a platform is already being created, but not in Syria, but in the UAE and Iran without mullahs in power. And this is a bastion of peace against Israel with Netanyahu in power, but not against the military mercantilists of the USA and the Russian Federation. In the meantime, Trump, in order to reconcile the military mercantilism of both countries, talks about 5,000 corpses a week in the confrontation between the armed forces of Ukraine and the Kremlin's forces. Tales about corpses are needed by Trump for the image of Putin the Butcher, who acts according to the saying, "Beat your own, strangers will be afraid," and to distract attention from their trades with the military mercantilists of the Russian Federation. And this is topic number 8. In this regard, Belousov's recent and repeated intimidation of Putin's wallets since December 2025 does not concern General Shoigu. He is a symbol of the protection of non-Russian military personnel and generals of the armed forces. Shoigu is also an Asian brother to Xi and Kim from North Korea. Shoigu's shield and sword, model of non-Russian personnel in the Russian army, copies the status of Black General Austin at the head of the U.S. Armed Forces under Biden. This is topic number 9. After all, according to a similar American scheme, the reform of the U.S. Armed Forces after Vietnam went on and on, the restructuring of the military of the Russian Federation. It is conducted under pseudo-historical arguments about the legendary Red Army, but with an emphasis on mercantile rights in the armed forces. One cash payments for self-defense, and not for mastering AI for rapid decision-making on command and control of troops for preemptive actions against the enemy. 2. Low military discipline was and is not from the shock of the revision of norms and rules of conduct in the Red, Stalinist and post-Stalinist armed forces in the 1990s, and today in the yellow by the yuan of the Russian military. A career and discipline are no longer based on ideology, but on money and speaking in Chinese. That is why the prospects for the implementation of lithium projects in Serbia and the Russian Federation, with or without the help of Chinese AI, motivate military mercantilism more than the petrocrats used to do with their petrodollars. 3. The military technical modernization of the military using drones and ITAI tools has been slow since 2023 due to the impunity of embezzlement. After all, military mercantilists have switched to cryptocurrency. And this is topic number 10. So, in 2006, pride in the dollar armed forces was felt by 3% of Russians, respect by 9%, i.e., 12% responded positively, while sorrow and pity registered 20%, fear of the military 28%, and shame or embarrassment 24%. That is, 72% of respondents in the Russian Federation had a negative attitude towards the Russian military in 2006. This is a failure of intelligence with the growth of military mercantilism. Anonymous data from AI with constant digital monitoring by the self-employed population is for topic number 11, digital investment of small and medium-sized businesses to monitor the threats of military mercantilism. We'll tell about militarization in the Russian Federation and Ukraine and the resistance of the population to it. But there is the last, but not at least topic number 12. What is your forecast for the Russian submarine fleet in the Arctic with its acoustic system? This system is already jamming the navigation of the Danish and all NATO countries' submarines. In addition, Greenland has been promised major strategic investments for the joint protection of the Arctic environment. Greenland is now an actor in the Arctic without relying on Denmark, the EU, NATO, or the United States. Will Greenland join the United States, as President Trump has suggested? Will Greenland, with a U.S. military base, come under the Kremlin's wing without NATO threats, while taking care of the ecology of the Russian North to save the polar bears? Gabord is out of Trump's narrow circle and Rubio is in India. Ethnic Indian Tulsi Gabbard, the queen of
Sorry,
intelligence community.
It's another pair of shoes, and I would like to know your opinion on these 12 topics for combination of researchers. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can get me by email or by phone. So I'm ready to work with you, and I'm open to your recommendations and critical advices. Thank you for your attention, and bye bye now.